Hey everyone, welcome back to Deep Nonsense, the show where we peel back Hollywood's curtain, sometimes to fact check the impossible, and sometimes just to bask in the movie magic.
You know us from our Science Meets Cinema deep dives, Ghostbusters, Gear, RoboCop Tech, even Everlasting Gobstoppers.
But today, it's time to go real deep, where we set aside science and just dig into the heart of the film, story, characters, themes, and those moments that stick with you.
So dim the lights, cue the popcorn, and let's dive real deep into Ghostbusters.
Oh man, I love this film.
So I think where we have to start with this movie, honestly, is with you. You have a passion for this movie that is, in my opinion, bordering on obsession, but I love it. So, okay, here it is. It's you the first time you see the film. How did you see it? Was it the theater?
Yes, it
Okay,
was.
it was the
I
theater.
got to
What
go.
theater? What theater?
It was a little 4-screen theater in the mall in my hometown.
Okay.
And that theater was brand new. Like it had just opened in like 83 or 84.
Okay.
And it was this movie about guys that were going to catch ghosts. And I saw the previews for it. I saw Slimer. I saw all the stuff in the previews. My friends told me that there was a 100-foot marshmallow man in it, and I had no idea what that would look like. In my head, there were thousands of creatures. I had no idea what this 100-foot tall marshmallow would look like. I was so excited to go see this film. So I go in. I remember it being one of the only times, or maybe one of the first times, that we actually got popcorn and soda at
Nice.
in there instead of sneaking it in. So we got the big bucket of popcorn just slathered in butter and a giant Coke. Sat down, started watching this movie, and the movie opens with a scene at a library where this librarian is pushing around books, putting books away in the basement, and it's kind of creepy. And as she's walking through, books are floating on shelves behind her. The card catalog opens and starts shooting cards up into the air, and she freaks out and starts running, and she runs into something that is just a light and wind, and she screams, and it's opening credits. And my little like kindergarten brain was blown. Like, this is kind of scary. I'd never seen something that was like really scary before, and
Mhm.
it was really scary to me. And then there's the scene where the Ghostbusters meet at the library, and they walk into the basement, and they see the ghost floating there in the stacks reading a book, and they're like, "What are we gonna do? I think one of us should try to talk to it." And so they step out into the hall, and Pete tries to talk to him. Peter Venkman, played by Bill Murray. It doesn't work. So then they go back around the corner and they reconvene, and Egon's tapping on his calculator, and Venkman's like, "Stop it!" And Ray goes, "Hey, I got an idea. All right, everybody, stay close." And they all like walk up towards her, and his idea is just to say, "Ready? Get her!" And they lunge towards her, and at that moment, this sweet old lady ghost turns to the camera and screams. Actually, I think it goes "Rah!" And her face peels off, and you see her skeleton underneath. And that was the first time I ever experienced a jump scare in a movie theater.
Nice.
It made my heart skip like 30 beats. I thought I was like something was wrong with me. I was like, "Oh my god!" And that was the first time I ever experienced a jump scare. And after thinking about it, after having seen that movie, I loved it. Like, I loved the fact that there was a jump scare, and it like caused a physical reaction in my body. So that I think the reason that I'm obsessed with that movie is because of that moment when I first saw the film, was the fact that it was the very first jump scare I ever had in my life. And I remember next to nothing about the rest of the screening. All I can remember is that it was the first time I had a jump scare, and I still can feel that feeling of my heart stopping and starting again whenever I had that first jump scare.
I can tell this one is a core memory for you. This is
It
deep.
really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man.
Here's an interesting question, right? So this is applicable, I think, to this film, and I'm going to act. I think friends in the listen verse. I'm going to act a little bit more as moderator or interviewer in this movie
Okay.
because one, It doesn't. I saw it later, kind of similar to with what we talked about in a previous episode regarding Willy Wonka, but also there's a special for people who grew up in the 80s. If you saw those films as a kid, you had an utterly different experience with them than you do with seeing them as an adult. There's
Oh yeah.
something about seeing them in that time, right? So what I'm curious about for you is, one, I have to imagine this solidified a love of how did they do that, right?
Hmm.
Your brain was probably wrapped around the, wait a minute, this, I know that thing isn't quote unquote real, but they somehow made it look real. And then also with that, you obviously, the jump scare wasn't something that you had as a negative experience. It actually was something, in a sense, positive for you and made you want to sort of experience something like that again.
Yes.
So so moving forward, 2 things. One is, what did this do to you and for you in terms of your trajectory as eventually working at a movie theater and working in the film industry, et cetera? And then 2, how was it that that ended up being a positive thing that made you want to experience more things like it, as opposed to at that age it being something that was a scary experience in a negative way?
I honestly don't know the answer to that last one,
Mhm.
because it seems like a coin toss. You know, some people experience uh, that jump scare, and it makes them never, ever, ever, ever want to experience that again. Like my
Right,
wife, for
exactly.
example, she hates horror films because when she gets jump scared, she feels stupid for getting uh, got, I guess.
Got
And
it, okay.
for me, I don't feel stupid for getting got. I feel that the filmmaker is brilliant for getting me because as a mid 40s human being watching horror films and also as a filmmaker who knows how that stuff is done.
Right.
Anytime there is a jump scare these days that gets me, that's not just a blatant like, oh, the door slams or they open a door and somebody screams in your face. If it's like
Right.
a legit jump scare, like say for example, the scene in Insidious where the red guy is behind the main character in the
There you
dining
go,
room and he
right?
just appears. That scared the bejesus out of me. And I was like, slow clap for the filmmakers on that one, man. You got me so hard.
Nice.
Um, so I think it's just a coin flip, really. And after watching Ghostbusters, I do remember that I became kind of obsessed with how they did it
Okay.
because I do remember watching lots of anytime there was like a making of on TV or I remember renting there was like a video at the rental store which was how they made Michael Jackson's Thriller and a big portion of that was putting the makeup on Michael Jackson for the werewolf sequence and how
Mhm.
they did like the werewolf transformation. That stuff was absolutely fascinating to me. There was a scene in Mr. Rogers for crying out loud where Mr. Rogers goes to the set of the Incredible Hulk and they watch Lou Ferrigno get the
Yes,
Incredible
I
Hulk
remember
makeup
that
put on.
episode. Oh my gosh.
That's a core memory for me because that I consumed all as much of the like behind the scenes stuff that I possibly could because in my brain when I grew up I was going to be one of those guys that did the special effects. Like that's what I wanted to do is I wanted to work in movies and I wanted to make the models and I wanted to do the stop motion and I wanted to do all the rubber mask stuff. But as I grew older and I got to be in my teens and this is like the late 90s,
Right.
all that stuff went away. Like, there wasn't even they weren't even shooting movies on film anymore for
Well,
crying out
practical
loud.
effects and yeah, and film
It all went
exactly.
into the computer. And so but I still had this love of movies. Like I was working at a movie theater in my brain, my stupid 15-year-old brain, as I was working, or 16 years old, as I'm working in the projection booth threading 35 millimeter projectors, I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be really good practice for whenever I have to thread a film camera when I'm on set shooting a movie, right?
Little did you know.
Oh, dude, I was so disappointed whenever like, what do you mean they're not shooting on film anymore? This is like, right at the height of like, oh, Sony, Sony Alta, George Lucas is shooting everything on digital. You have to have a digital projector to play Revenge of the Sith and like all that junk. Um,
Okay, so pause for a moment because
yeah,
for our listeners out there, we are both have worked in various capacities in the video and film production industries. What was the first camera that you owned, that you shot on?
Oh, whenever I was work I had a the first real job that I had after the movie theater, I went to Circuit City and bought a Sony Handycam
Okay.
that worked on the little bitty mini DV
The
tapes,
mini DVD? Yep.
and I on the weekends I bought an iMac with Final Cut. I think it was Final Cut 2.8 was how long ago this was. This was like 2001, and I I would shoot like the very first thing I ever shot was I had a cheese crock full of pennies in my house,
Okay.
and I put it on its side and I spelled out the words "get out" and a skull and crossbones on the table in pennies,
I
and
love it.
I set up my camera and I took a image of it because it had a stop motion thing on it where you could just push the button and it'd be one
Right?
frame.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
So I did that, and then I moved all the pennies just a little bit. Did it again, moved all the pennies a little bit, and I basically moved them all back into the jar, right? And then I shot the jar tipping over and spilling out onto the table. And then had my friend come over, and I shot him cleaning the house, and like doors would shut behind him. Like I like put the camera at the end of the hallway and I shot him like dusting the doorway at the bathroom, but the bedroom door, I'm in the bedroom and I slammed the door behind him and he looks, and we shot this little short film of basically my friend cleaning his house, quote unquote, and accidentally knocking over the pennies, and I put that shot of the pennies falling over, and then I played that stop motion thing in reverse so it looked like all the pennies slid out onto the table and said get out. And
So
all I
good.
then I just went out in my front yard and showed him running out the house in like I sped it up like Benny Hill. And he ran out of the house, ran down to the end of the street, turned the corner, and then I went down onto the street and I showed him running as far away from the camera as possible. Then we went down on Broadway and showed him running past the camera like 6 times, going down to Broadway, running all the way down to the freaking river and acting like he was going to jump in the river. And that was the that was the movie, the very first thing I ever shot. But it all revolved around a special effect.
Well,
And
that and there is a supernatural element to it, right? The
yeah,
idea of the
right.
door slamming. So, in a way, there's this Ghostbusters for you is a little bit not only a core memory, but also one of those original inspirations. Because is that where you became sort of enamored with the idea of using special effects for supernatural, spooky stuff in films?
It is where my love of supernatural and spooky and effects came from.
Came together, right?
Yeah, my love of like the actual catalyst that made me want to become a filmmaker, which I am a filmmaker. I've made quite a few shorts, a few music videos. I've made a feature film that has been distributed. It I That was Jurassic Park, and we could talk about that on the Jurassic
Yeah, and
Park
so that'll be
episode.
another episode because there's a
Um,
lot to talk about there when you want to talk about effects.
Yeah, but as far as Ghostbusters, that really it opened up something in this 6-year-old's brain, and also another thing that it did was watching Ghostbusters 2 4 years later.
Mhm.
It closed off something in my brain because I was so disappointed with Ghostbusters 2
And
as
you quickly
opposed to
learned
1.
about sequels.
Yeah, that was another big thing. Now, as an adult going back and watching Ghostbusters 2, it is not as bad as I thought it was when I was a kid. In fact, I hold a special place in my heart for Ghostbusters 2. There's
Okay,
so many
right.
things to like about that film, but it was no Ghostbusters 1.
Okay, that's amazing. Short tidbit here from my side because the thing that always inspired me when it came to films, which is funny, and I think one of the reasons why you and I have worked so well together on the projects we've done. Um, you're a highly, highly visual person. You understand visual language very well. I do, but I don't think I understand it as well as you do. I'm a language person, and so the very first thing I ever shot, I went out and bought myself the one of the dumbest things I've ever done financially, but I'm actually glad I did it. I went out and bought a Canon GL2 3 CCD camera. That was the first camera I owned. And at the time knew nothing about cameras.
Mhm.
And when I bought that camera, one of the things that I was so frustrated with was that it would only essentially do deep focus. There was no way to get a really soft background because of the way that
Right.
the CCDs were interpreting the images. The first and so I bought a MacBook Pro and then I bought Final Cut Essentials is what I bought. So right, I got
Mm.
Final Cut Essentials, a MacBook Pro, and a Canon. 3 CCD GL2 with mini DV, which is what, again, what we were shooting on at the time. And the
Prop frame.
first short I ever made, and I thought I was probably the coolest person in the world. The whole thing was centered around language and some sort of esoteric existential concept that my friend wrote. It was called Bards of Suburbia. And it was the first half of it, which was the half that was done in vernacular language, was in color. And then I thought I was the first person to ever think that when you want to go to switch the audience's perspective on something, you make it in black and white. So the second half of the movie, which is all done in Shakespearean verse, is in black and white.
Dude, I have known you for more than a decade.
Yes.
Why is
And
this the
you
first I'm hearing
you
of
didn't
this
know that, did you?
project? Why I must see this
I
project.
got to see if I can find it. I don't even know if I can still find
Find
it.
it.
I think my sister has a copy of the DVD because she was in it. But so so it's interesting to see the things, and we were discussing this before. I grew up on classic Hollywood because that's what my dad always showed us, right? So
Mhm.
everything I grew up on was written, particular the period stuff was written in this sort of this elevated language. That was the stuff I fell in love with. And again, I think that's part of the reason that you and I end up working so well together on the projects we do. The two perspectives that we have make a pretty great combination. So there you go. There's a little bromance there for
Mhm.
you. But back to Ghostbusters. So you see this film. We'll kind of track this prior to you seeing the sequel. You see this film. It's kind of blown your mind as a kindergartner, and then as a kindergartner, and even thereafter before the sequel comes out, what were the things that stuck with you about the film? You talked about special effects, but let's talk about the characters now. Let's talk about particularly the fact that they're so distinct. Was that something that made sense to your brain at that time, or were you just looking at it as a whole?
Nope. I had no love for character work or any of that. When I thought about Ghostbusters for the first probably 6 years of me knowing about that film, all I thought about was the cool ghost puppets like Slimer,
Mhm.
and which, by the way, I for a person, and maybe it was just me, I had a book of Ghostbusters, and it was like one of those where you'd play the record and flip through it, and it would like tell the story while the record would
Nice.
play. There's a scene in the film. They never call that character Slimer. There's actually a scene where Pete Venkman is like, "It's right here, Ray. It's looking at me," and Ray's like, "He's an ugly little spud, isn't he?" And that is what I knew that ghost as for the first 5, 6 years of my
The ugly
life.
little
Like,
spug.
he's the ugly little spud. He's not Slimer. I railed against calling that ghost Slimer forever, even though they did it in the cartoon, and every single person would call that ghost Slimer forever. I was like, why is everybody calling him that? This ghost is the ugly little spud. And it might just be because I saw that line in the book, and whenever I read it, it just burned itself into my brain that
Okay,
that's
right.
what that thing was. But um, yeah, there was no character work or anything. It was all look at the cool special effects, like the puppet ghosts, the crazy like skeletons with eyeballs, the giant 100-foot Stay Puft Marshmallow Man,
Right.
and the proton packs that shot these weird laser beams out the front that could catch a ghost. Like having something that powerful on your back almost like turned you into a superhero. I thought of the Ghostbusters as like invincible superheroes because they saved the city from a monster that was gonna like wreck the entire. You know what I mean? So, and it was all
Yeah,
because of
right.
those proton packs. So it was all about the effects for me for the first 5, 7 years of watching that film, and then
And here's a fun fact to it. I think there might be people who are unaware of this, but so at that time, because of the types of films that were being made, VFX studios were in high demand and it was
Mhm.
tough. This film had a budget that originally the producers thought was going to be prohibitive in terms of actually making a profit off of it. Um, so the filming took place between, I think it was October 83 and January 84, in both New York City and Los Angeles. So you've got like this coast to coast filming happening, already expensive, but because of the competition for special effects studios with all the films that were being shot utilizing that technology at the time, Richard Edlund actually used part of the budget to found Boss Film Studios,
No
which
way.
employed all of these combinations of practical effects, miniatures, and puppets, so that you could get those ghoulish visuals.
Mhm.
But they were that dedicated to it. Do you think the fact that a step like that was taken, and maybe you started to appreciate this more as you got older, do you think a fact that a step like that was taken to really dedicate themselves to making the practical effects so effective, do you think that's one of the reasons why this film has survived the way it has in terms of it? Every generation seems to be able to love this film.
I think so. It's because every there's like no uncanny valley here, right?
That's
Wh-
exactly right.
you know objectively when you watch this film, oh hey, that ghost is a puppet that's probably on strings that they shot in a water tank and just put, superimposed it onto uh the shot of New York City, right? You know that every single ghost is some kind of a puppet or a man in a suit, but because it's real and it's tactile and you know that you there somewhere in the world there is a physical Slimer puppet that you could go and touch, and like that is there, and you could puppet that thing to make it do what it does in the movie. I think
Right.
that's why it survives. There is no Gollum from Lord of the Rings any somewhere that
That's right.
exists
Yeah.
that you could puppet to make it do exactly what it does in the movie because it's all digital, and
Unless
that's
you can rent Andy Circus for a day.
sure, but that's all. It's different because it's
Right,
not
exactly.
it's not tactile. It's not there in the world, and I think that's part of the reason why certain things have survived as long as they have.
Should we do a
Um,
rabbit trail here about practical effects versus digital? Maybe even just a short one. The reason I ask is because when I interact with teenagers and kids these days, asking them about films they've seen, almost everything they watch is either animated or almost every non human character is completely, fully digitally rendered.
mhm.
there's there's an aspect to the way that they describe their interaction with those characters that is very consumer. It's that thing where they, for the moment that they were watching that thing, it completely held their attention. After the fact, I don't hear them talk about it the way you talked about those characters from Ghostbusters, as you, not only the first time you saw it, but also the time you got older. For your own kids, what have their reactions to similar films as kids been in the digital age?
Uh, so both of my kids, first of all, absolutely love Ghostbusters. They talk about it at least 2 or 3 times a year. The subject of Ghostbusters comes up because, hey,
Amazing.
it's either Halloween or we're talking about like movies to watch during the summer. It's always one of those pantheon high way up films that they love, and it still works on kids of that generation. Now, 10 years ago we all went to see Avatar, and every not even 10 years ago, it was 2010, so 2015, but I did show my kids 10 years ago Avatar, and they
Mhm.
both absolutely love Avatar, and we
Yeah,
both went to see the sequel. They absolutely loved it, but if you recall, when Avatar was in the theaters, it was the biggest thing in the world. It
yes, it
like
was.
people were shocked that it broke the record for Titanic, which
It did.
was the previous film that James Cameron made,
I was
right?
gonna say
That
Cameron just lives to break his own records.
it's funny. He made this movie that made more money than any other movie ever, and then, like, for 13 years, we were like, "When's Jim Cameron gonna make another movie?" And in my circle of friends, we were like, "Dude's scared because no matter what he makes, it's gonna fail compared to his last movie because you can't beat Titanic." Well, dude made Avatar, and
Yep,
it beat Titanic, right? And it was the biggest thing in the world for 6 months. Everybody was talking about Avatar. People were obsessed with it. People were obsessed with going to Pandora and watching it in 3D. And then it left the theaters, went to home video, and then just whew, it was
it was
gone.
gone.
Nobody
That's right.
talked about Avatar ever. Like people were talking about Star Wars for 30 years after Star Wars,
That's
but
right.
like people would be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that movie. That was good." Like it wasn't in the pop culture. Nobody said anything about it. And then all of a sudden Avatar 2, The Way of Water comes out. And again, it's a huge juggernaut. It's making all this money. People are going to see it. People are talking about it. Now it's on home video and nobody's saying a word about Avatar 2.
That's right.
And give it a month when the first trailer for Avatar 3 comes out. It's like Avatar 3 fire, I guess. They did regular Avatar,
Earth,
then they
Wind, and
did
Fire.
water
Water,
Avatar. Next,
water
they're gonna
Avatar.
do fire Avatar. Maybe they'll do an ice Avatar and then a Earth one, and then they'll do a Captain Planet Avatar. I don't know what it's gonna be,
Captain
but
Planet Avatar.
honest to God, I'm looking this up right now. I'm gonna look it up. Let me just see what the
Do it.
title of Avatar 3 is because they made it. I think he actually there it goes. Avatar Fire and Ash is what it's called. So
Yeah, he's just working
it's
his way through elements. That's
through
right.
all the elements, which is awesome. Whatever. Let's see if I can
Which
find.
eventually means that at some point they're gonna do a super movie, which is gonna combine Avatar, James Cameron's Avatar, and Avatar: The Last Airbender, because they're gonna take all the elements between those 2 films, and they're gonna make a super movie out of them, is what they're gonna do.
Oh, I just got goosebumps. Ah, that is awesome. Oh, I think on that note, we should wrap this up. All right, that wraps our real deep on Ghostbusters. I hope you enjoyed hanging out in the cinematic trenches with us.
Now, if you're loving this format, drop us a review, hit subscribe, and share with your fellow movie buffs.
Next time, we'll be back in the lab pondering whether or not we could actually meld man and machine to create our very own Robocop.
All right. Thanks for listening to Deep Nonsense, and see you on the next reel.
However you do it, I'll do it the same way.
Yeah, you can put those. See you on the next reel. There you go.
I can do both of them. Yeah.
We should do Turtle Power.